Hi there guys, and welcome back to another vlog. My name is Suze Nethercutt. I am a long-time professional artist and of late a master's student in visual art. In this video, I want to walk you through an interesting personal project I have had going, which is involving the artwork that you can see on my computer screen here. So this artwork is kind of the type of work that I am best known for online. I've had a lot of commercial success with it. I license it across the world to various companies, and I've also done a lot of commissions in this style of artwork. Recently, I was approached by an organisation I've worked for before to do another commission for them. And so I thought I would take this as an opportunity to dip back into that style of painting, which is quite different to what I do now, and really study myself in the process of making that art and seeing if there's anything there in the techniques and the approach that I use that might want to come across into my current painting practice. As I move into the final year of my part-time candidature in my Masters of Visual Art, it's really important to me that I get my painting to a place by the time of my graduating exhibition that feels really aligned not only with my future direction, but also that it's carrying through the meaningful threads from my previous body of work. So in this journal, I'm creating space for myself to really honestly and openly reflect on the work that I'm making now, and also my previous practice in a more commercial art realm, to see if there's threads I want to bring through. So I've literally spent time printing out photographs of my paintings on my printer and sticking them into this journal and making notes and observations about what I think is working in these types of work and what is there that I can see that can come through. So I kind of had to go through a process of remembering how I make this artwork. It's been a while since I've created something in this style, and the color palette and acrylics that I use are very different to what I'm currently using for my painting practice. And pitching for this project for the commission was the perfect opportunity to remind myself. So I have a bit of a process when I'm pitching for a commission that after I've engaged the customer, I create mock-ups of artwork based on what they're looking for, and I try to make them to scale, so the dimensions of the paper that I cut to paint those small scale mock-ups do match the specifications of the artwork that they're intended for. So I just use a watercolor paper for this process, and I figure out those dimensions, and then I tape that paper onto boards. I have MDF boards cut for me by my hardware store at various sizes that I can really easily tape paper onto with masking tape and use those to create my commission mock-ups. I then had to go through and pick out all the colours from my acrylic paints collection that I commonly use for this style of painting, many of which I haven't used recently because the colour palette that I have been working with has really changed in the last 4 years or so and become much more muted. I'm using a lot more natural colours. So I really had to remind myself of how I worked with those colours and what in fact they were, and that took a little bit of time. And then I got myself prepared with my photographs in front of me so that I could sort of use those as a guide, because that is what had been indicated to me by the client about what they were looking for. And I just started work on a couple of different mock-ups on paper. As I was working away on these paintings, the things that I was paying attention to in particular was around my body and my sensibility and where my mind and my general spirit is at when I am making these works. These paintings, which kind of involve a whole spectrum of the rainbow colours, have been enormously successful over the years, and there's something about them that really touches and reaches people. And while I sort of got to a stage with making this artwork where I really craved working in a different way and with a different palette, I do recognise that there was something there that I can't quite put my finger on that people really responded to. And I think part of what that is around the energy of the way that I create these artworks and the freedom and looseness of the marks. So I really wanted to study my approach to these abstracted floral paintings. And I find that one of the best ways for me to find my flow and to really produce good artwork is to be prolific, which is just to make a lot of paintings and to make them in rapid succession. Because I find that when I am in process and not really thinking too much, that my body starts to remember how to move and relate to the colors and the shapes and the forms that I'm putting down on the canvas in a way that's very intuitive. And it's a way of painting that I feel like sometimes I lose touch with in my current practice. So I really wanted to pay attention to those moments as I was working and bring them to the forefront of my mind, and also pay attention to anything else that is occurring subconsciously that I haven't really thought about before. So, this commission and the preparations for it became an incredible opportunity of self observation and also of excavating my own past journey as an artist and my history. And I think this was a really pivotal time to be doing that as I go into another phase of evolving my artwork, where my knowledge of where I am headed and feeling really embodied in my awareness of what I'm painting as I move forward into creating artworks for my final exhibition for the Masters. So you can just see me here finishing off these studies, these mock-ups that I've created for my client. I made a couple in each of the sizes according to what was requested. And yeah, look, if you followed me for a while, you'll recognize this style really well. There's a very clearly defined personal language of mark making and use of color in these artworks that I think I have become really well known for. So that is also tricky for me because I have consciously stepped away from this style of painting and stepped into a new approach, which isn't nearly as popular, which is an incredibly nerve-wracking thing to do from a professional perspective. But I know that there are clues for me in this style of painting that I want to bring through into my current practice. The final step in the process of making the commission studies is to remove them from their boards, photograph them, and get them to my client. So I just take the boards down and I use a hairdryer actually to heat up the gum on the masking tape so that I can peel it back easily without tearing the paper, which leaves a lovely crisp white edge along my paintings. And so once that's been removed, I photograph them and edit them in Lightroom so that I can send some really nice quality images to my client. You can just see me here titling the paintings. And with my commission proposal sent off, it was time to switch gears and start thinking about the artwork that I was going to be making for my own practice. Now you can see me here, I am prepping a denuded canvas. So I explained this a little bit in a previous video. What I've been doing is using old canvases that I had taken off the stretcher bars and replaced with linen, which you can see here, and painted them the color of linen, because I think one of the problems that I've been having in my art practice of late is that I tighten up a bit when I'm working on the linen simply because it's so expensive. So I've been playing around with painting my canvases with a linen toned background, and I've been using the Derivan Matisse coloured gesso to do this. I made a slightly altered colour so that it matched my linen fairly well, so that I can be working on a colour surface that's similar to linen, but hopefully not feel too tightened up about the fact that I'm using this very expensive fiber to essentially experiment on, because I have been actively playing around with a few different approaches to painting, and I haven't quite settled on the approach that I want to take in the future. And it may well be that I don't settle on one particular mode of painting. It may be that I end up working in a variety of different ways. I don't know at this stage, but what I can tell you is that working on these canvases with the colored gesso did free me up a lot and made me feel a lot more gestural in my mark making and giving myself permission to make mistakes. So you can see me here working with the Caran d'Ache water-soluble wax pastels on this piece to create an underpainting, which is a technique that I have been playing around with quite a bit. And you can see me using it here on this particular painting. So what I've been doing is playing around with making a background either in acrylic or in the water-soluble wax pastels, and then going in over the top once it's dry with oil-based media. Now, I've been playing around with the oil sticks and these RNF drawing oils quite a bit of late, and really loving how they enable me to be drawing on the canvas effectively and having that freedom that you get when you're using a drawing medium. I've talked a lot already in previous videos about trying out the RNF drawing oils and also the pigment sticks and oil sticks that I have. So I won't go into that again too much here, because the thing really of interest was how I was using that media and thinking about ways that I can use it that brings in some of the mark making language that really worked in some of the paintings that I created in that older style of painting that I do. So I wanted to play around with the ability of the oil sticks and different ways of blending them with a little bit of solvent and also with each other to approach subjects that I'd previously already painted. So this painting you can see here is another one that I have made around the Scotland forest experience. And for anyone who's been here for a while, you might recognize this scene in terms of a few paintings that I made a while back for my master's about this experience I had in the Scotland forest. But the approach of these works is quite different, and I was very much influenced by what colours I had available to me in the oil sticks. So I was a little bit limited because I didn't have quite the colours that I wanted to have for this project. But what I loved about it was that I started using the oil sticks in a way that really evoked the way that I work with the acrylic paint, in the way that I was very free with it on the surface of the canvas and blending the colours with each other to produce this really rich, atmospheric but very loose effect. So that was really my first experiment with this technique of using the neo colours as a background and then the oils over the top. I then wanted to explore this beautiful tree that you can see an interesting edit that I did in Lightroom that's close by to where I live. And I wanted to create another painting using the Caran d'Ache Neocolor 2s as my background and blending them in a similar way as to what I did with the previous painting. But what was interesting about this project was that once I got started with the Neocolor 2s, which were really just meant to be a background layer, I actually never stopped. So this entire painting ended up being just with the Neocolor 2s. So you can see me applying it on there and then emulsifying it with a wet wipe to start creating the tree details. And I absolutely love drawing trees with crayons and with a drawing media, because I feel like I can really capture the texture and the detail in the bark, that skin of the tree, in such an evocative way. And I have found the Neocolors too to be absolutely brilliant for doing this. So I usually either emulsify it with a wet wipe, or you can see me here on the slimmer parts of the branches using a wet Q-tip to create the drawing. Again, I'm working on a background of the canvas that has been painted with the coloured gesso to look like linen, and I really love working on this surface actually. Taping the canvas onto the board is particularly helpful because I do have to apply quite a bit of pressure with the pastel to get the kind of marks that I'm making, which is really difficult to do on a stretched canvas because you don't have the same kind of purchase. So I highly recommend doing this if you are going to want to draw with the pastels in a painting in this way. It is really helpful. So as you can see here, I'm gradually working up the painting in layers. I'm starting to fill in some of the background here and using my cloth quite a bit to move in some of the texture of the tree leaves and really getting that softness and building up those layers gradually. I'm just going to hand you over now to Real-Time Suze, who is explaining what happened when I got to a certain point in this painting. I did a bit more on this that I didn't show in the video, and it has changed it quite significantly. I used a clear gesso over the top of the wax pastels because I wanted to create a new ground for working on, and it smudged it quite a bit, but in a way that I think kind of works with the painting, so that's where it's at the moment. I also changed the bottom a bit. I really want to kind of continue the process of bringing together my professional practice with my research-based practice. So the first step was to kind of mess it up a bit in the bottom and to bring more looseness in. So I'm pretty happy with where it's at the moment, and I think what I'll do now is transfer it to the actual size of the stretched canvas, so a smaller board, so I can see how it's looking. I buy framed canvas sets for my painting practice, so I usually work with a standard size, and I have boards cut for those sizes so that I can kind of semi-stretch a canvas over the top to see what it will actually look once it's stretched over the stretcher bars, if that makes sense. So that's just what I'm doing here, is I'm removing that painting from the flat board and I'm putting a board that is the actual size of the canvas underneath it so that I can fold those edges over and see actually what it's going to look like when it is properly stretched. I just simply tape the canvas onto the board with some masking tape, and then I can see what she's going to look like. So I'm pretty pleased with where this one has ended up, but I'm going to go in and do a little bit more work on it just to bring in that looseness and mark making back on top. So it was really helpful to do that clear gessoed background so that I could start effectively with a fresh surface to work on again. I used the Liquitex clear gesso, which has a little bit of tooth added to it, like a little bit of grit in it, so that it kind of creates a perfect surface for working onto with things like pastels that need a little bit of texture on the surface to adhere. So I'm just going in again and putting in a lot more loose colour and mark making over the top of that streaked background created by the clear gesso, and I'm really loving the effect. I think at the end of the day this painting ended up to be quite a successful painting, even though it wasn't really what I set out to do in the first place, which was to use this background as a background for the oils to go on over the top. And I had quite a few things that I reflected on after I finished the painting, probably the most important of which is that I think I need to step away from my photograph a lot earlier in the painting process and start to let my imagination fill in the gaps with colour and form a bit more, because that is when my true innate mark making and sensibility comes into play, and I can feel myself really moving with the painting and moving with what's inside me and expressing myself in my most authentic way. So this was a really helpful thing to reflect on, and I wrote all of these things down. There were so many different small elements to that process, and reflecting on it in my notebook was incredibly helpful in just pinning down some of those elements that I really want to pay attention to in the future in my art practice. Another thing I noticed is I really need to let go of obsessing over which medium I am using to produce a particular painting. Because my previous practice was largely painting with acrylics, and I have been consciously trying to move away from using acrylics so much in my practice, I think I may have kind of ruled out a approach with mixed media that comes quite naturally to me that could be very helpful, particularly around letting myself be free to use an acrylic based background or a wax pastel based background, blending that with oil based media on top, sometimes perhaps just using the acrylic media and not worrying about using anything else on top, just really giving myself the freedom to use whatever medium comes most easily to me. If I'm being really honest with myself, I think I have to recognize that I've been a little bit rigid around that particular point. So, having recognized that, I think I need to embrace that I am a mixed media artist and to just let that happen in my artwork, I wanted to go back into working with the oil sticks and apply some of these learnings that I had. But I think I mentioned a bit earlier that I've been feeling a little bit limited with the color selection that I've had, both in the R&F drawing oils, which are these smaller ones you can see here, and also the pigment sticks, which is the larger oil stick. So you can see that I have chosen quite a nice variety of different greens, particularly jewel greens, olive greens, and also I didn't have many purples in my collection or pinks. So I just filled out that collection a bit more. The R&F oils don't have the most amazing selection of colours, but I am finding if I blend them with pigment sticks, which is the larger version that are a little bit softer, that I get a really great effect. And I do like how I can get really gestural marks with them, particularly with bigger paintings. So I just wanted to test out some of these new colours that I had with some ideas that I've been having for approaching that forest scene in Scotland again, and really playing around with the colours and not being so tied into my photographic reference as I have been. It's been quite a revelation for me to go back into my old painting style and to remember that I actually have a way with colour that I think perhaps I had put to the side and rejected a little bit for some reason. And just painting that way again has reminded me that I think I need to go in again and let myself play with colour in a bit more of an imaginative way again with my current landscape work. It's also, I think, partly to do with the fact that mostly what I had been painting in that style of very bright floral abstract painting are these imagined gardens and imagined sort of colorscapes that have loosely interpreted floral imagery, whereas working in landscape is quite a different thing. So I'm still working my way through that, and this little drawing in my sketchbook was an experiment with those new colours that I got for the Scotland forest. But I wanted to really head back into my relationship with the Australian trees, and particularly the spotted gum that some of you might remember I drew a few videos back at my parents' house. There's a beautiful spotted gum there that I really love and my parents really love, and I had these gorgeous photographs and I really wanted to capture it. Especially the bark on these trees is just so beautiful and evocative. So I'm working once again on one of the denuded canvases, which has that linen coloured background painted onto it, and I'm just marking out the perimeter of where the painting's going to sit inside of that canvas. And so after drawing a basic outline of my composition in white charcoal, I decided that this time I would paint the underpainting just in acrylic without the Neocolor 2 pastels and see how that goes as a technique for me. And honestly, it went pretty well. I was really pleased with how I was able to get down that base layer in acrylics, which are really familiar to me, not just for the base of the tree, which you can see here is starting to appear, but also for the background and the way that I approach the surrounding foliage, and also keeping in mind that painting color fields and getting a beautiful blend of colors and a dance of colors across the landscape is something that I really understand very well with acrylic painting. So going in and creating those very light washy background shades of the landscape and the tree and the leaves that you can see me doing here came quite naturally and was really easy for me to do in the acrylic. Not dissimilar to the way that I had been using the Neo Pastel, but I think there's something about me with a brush with color on it where I feel like I really intuitively understand how to make those to interplay. And this is something that had been brought to the forefront of my mind specifically because I had been studying that old style of painting that I had been doing, and I knew that I needed to lean into that. So I was really pleased with how that played out in the underpainting of this painting. I can see the influence of those earlier works in this particular work. So once I had this really lovely light washy acrylic underpainting and I'd let it dry for a couple of hours, I went back in and with my oil sticks and started to introduce those to the painting. I started off with the beautiful spotted gum tree bark, which was the primary reason that I actually wanted to use the oil sticks and the drawing oils, is because they leave such a chunky, beautiful, velvety layer of paint with clearly defined edges and a lot of texture on the surface that I feel really evokes the bark of a tree. And it's the reason I keep coming back to trying to figure out how I can use these to produce the kinds of paintings that I want to make. So I had introduced quite a few different new colors to my palette by then, quite a few new neutrals that I'd bought in the Sennelier brand of oil sticks or pigment sticks, whatever you want to call them. And they're the bigger ones that I'm using. And I absolutely loved that they were bigger because they enabled me to leave really chunky marks and quite chunky layers of paint as I was working into it. So I stopped midway and did some journaling all the way through making this painting. As I was noticing all these things that were happening, the decisions I was making, the way that the previous work was influencing the work that I was making, I made sure that I sat down and wrote about it so that I could remember in a quite a granular way what were the parts of the process that were working and what weren't. And for this painting, there was a lot more that was working than wasn't. So I continued on with my oil sticks, working on this beautiful textured surface of the spotted gum, bringing in this time some of the darker tones, the beautiful soft greys and darker colors of the bark. And I just felt really aligned the whole way through making this painting. I felt very in tune with my medium. It felt very easy as I was working on it. And I always like to pay attention to what feels easy when I'm working and in the flow, because that's when I know that I'm very close to something very authentic within. And that is the place where I actually want to be when I'm painting. That's the felt experience that I want to have, that I feel like communicates through an artwork. Then it was time to move into the background and start to flesh out that a little bit more. And that's when I brought in not only using the oil sticks, but also using a little bit of solvent to emulsify the oil sticks, just to keep some of that atmospheric effect in the background. So I had a lot of fun doing that and really love that these oil sticks have the flexibility to just become paint, because that's in fact what they are. They're just paint, oil paint that has a lot of wax binder in them, but you can just use a bit of solvent to turn them into a paint. And I felt like that process worked really beautifully over the top of the underpainting that I did in acrylic and helped me to just really add dimension. And I think it also helps that because the underpainting is acrylic and it dried very quickly, that the overall time in producing the painting was reduced because the underlayer wasn't in oil. So I think that also really appealed to me. So then it was just really all about finishing touches, And I was really pleased with how this painting turned out in the end. I'll be really curious actually what you think. If you have a particular artwork that I've painted in this video that appeals to you, it would actually be very helpful to me to receive feedback from you about which ones appeal the most. I know that I enjoyed making this painting the most. It's the one that felt the most aligned to me. But I also realized that other people might see it differently and they might prefer something else that I did. So thanks so much for being here. I hope me going through this process has been helpful for you in your own art practice, and that it can help you to see different ways that you can reflect on your own artwork from the past and how that influences moving forward with your practice. I'd be very interested to know if anything that I've talked about today has sparked anything off for you. And I'd also love to hear if you have any tips for me about what's worked for you in analysing your own work and really growing your art. It'd be wonderful to hear what your thoughts are about that. So thanks so much for being here. If you've stayed till the very end, why don't you give me a paintbrush emoji, because this has been a very painting focused video. And yeah, if you haven't subscribed and you like what you're seeing, then please hit subscribe, and I hope that you come back again. And yeah, take care until next time, and I'll catch you then. Bye.